So this is the time for me to talk about my teenage humiliations. In fact, we would encourage.
How many of them do we not know about yet?
I barely touched the surface. Hello and welcome to the second weekly episode of Quiet Riot, the podcast where highbrow politics meets lowbrow puns. I'm Andreou.
And I'm Naomi Smith. Welcome back to Quiet Riot, the podcast that brings you all the passion with a little less shouting.
Apart from me, I'm Kenny, the producer, the nanny in the corner of the studio with no microphone this week.
Each week, Quiet Riot will bring you the political lowdown, our takes on it all, and we'll be joined by a rotating roster of regulars.
We're not afraid to admit... What? We're not afraid to admit when we get things wrong, and we don't claim to have all the answers. We just try to work stuff out with you, not at you.
And we won't just be telling you what we think, we'll be letting you know what you can do, the action you can take, and the campaigns to join.
We want to build a tribe of quiet rioters from left to right and help push back on populism. Pull close those who believe facts matter.
So get yourself a brew, pull up a pew, and let's start a quiet riot. Quiet riot.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Quiet Riot, or is it episode 3? We snuck out a Sunday school bonus show about the Tories' plan to bring back military service. So go have a listen to that if you've missed it. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi. And we're terrified that our newborn baby, Quiet Riot, will soon be subject to military conscription and we'll have to dig into our tax-free pension to buy them a one-way ticket to Rio for their 18th birthday.
On today's show, Sunak's plan is working. If the plan is for Tories to win as few seats as possible, that is, we survey the ruins of the first week of campaigning.
And mind your business. Labour gains the endorsement of business leaders, but is stability and discipline enough of a growth strategy?
Time to introduce our guests, and we are spoiling you today because for your delectation, we are joined by not one, but two of the sharpest people we know. First up, Miatta Fahnbulleh, former boss of the New Economics Foundation and current Labour candidate for Peckahm. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
Miatta, this time last week, Sunak had not got wet yet. How surreal has it been after months of, kinetic energy building up to be able to go out there and just ask people for their vote?
Completely. I mean, we thought he might go in May. So the entire machine and operation had ramped up for a May election. The good news is that we were ready. But I don't think, coming out of a local election where you've done pretty badly, it didn't feel like this was the time to go.
No.
I think we're all trying to second guess what on earth prompted it. So it did come as a bit of a surprise.
What do you think prompted it? Because there are rumours that there were letters going in and he was worried he wouldn't basically last the summer.
It's hard to know. I cannot put myself in the mind of Rishi Sunak, especially after this week. I mean, I guess there's something that this is probably as good as it gets. Inflation had come down, but we're expecting it to go up because energy prices are going up.
Right, that was what I wanted to do. I knew it was being pipped to go back up again. I wasn't sure what the driving factor of that would be in the summer, but yes. Energy is the one,
So we're expecting an increase in energy prices, so that this is the peak of we've turned round the corner.
Yeah.
Small boats crossing would probably have increased over the summer just because of weather conditions.
Retail data was shocking last month, so it might growth might dip.
So I suspect it was, if we're trying to tell a story about it's all getting better to go now before people realise it's a con.
My current theory is that he wants to get his kids settled into high school in Palo Alto in September. So he's got to have the election in July to do the move in August and get them in their uniforms.
But Naomi, he said he'll be standing again and representing his constituency fully for the next 5 years. Are you saying you distrust this?
Yes, we're delighted to have you. But bringing up the rear is writer, columnist.
What? No one told me that there was going to be that shit when I came in here.
podcaster and dog father, it's Ian Dunt. Hi, Ian.
Dog father.
This all feels very familiar.
Ian, what has the 4th of July election done to your work and holiday schedule?
Catastrophically fucked it. I mean, everything has gone terribly wrong, and I can't plan for it. Sometimes I have this sort of suspicion that Rishi Sunak may not have really been thinking about me and my professional and personal arrangements when he came up with this date. So no, it's very bad. And there was a holiday to Greece that is booked for June that I am still going on. So I am basically the new Steve Baker. I will literally cover the campaign from my sun lounger in Greece. That is my
Is everyone going to Greece except me?
Yeah.
Well, I timed it to perfection. I got back from Greece 3 days before the election.
No, that was well timed.
It was. Well, you're both very, very welcome.
So, on to our first regular feature. Went really well for me last week, I feel, didn't it? The week's politics in 60 seconds, or as near as I can get it.
All right, start your clocks. Here we go. Rishi Sunak called an election from inside his swimming pool.
Then he had journalists thrown out of his launch.
Then he failed to organise a presser in a brewery, announced that he had a bold plan from where the Titanic was built, and managed to be photographed with exit signs here, here and here.
He then turned to sport, congratulated the Welsh on England's success, was tackled by a small piece of plastic and showed his stamina and youthful vigour, in contrast to Sir Sleepy Keir by playing balls.
Not to be outdone, Ed Davey fell off a paddleboard a lot.
Then came the policies. Sunak will bring back national service, shower pensioners with a lavish 28p a week, and abolish all degrees that are not a PPE from Oxford.
Angela Rayner was cleared by Greater Manchester Police, and word on the street is HMRC have now had to block Dan Hodges' email address.
Diane Abbott was finally given back the Labour whip, but she still doesn't know if she'll be standing as a candidate.
The first round of big polling data shows that Sunak has, in fact, managed to move the dial, mostly in the opposite direction to the one he wanted.
Former Tory MP Lucy Allen crossed the aisle to the Reform Party. The House of Commons cleaners had to explain to her that Parliament had already been prorogued.
Sticking with Reform, Jacob Rees-Mogg says the Tories should do a deal with Reform UK that would see Farage and Ben Habib getting big government jobs.
A leaked email from CCHQ, and by leaked we mean they sent it to everyone by mistake, revealed several MPs have tried to cross the channel in a small boat to France.
And Keir Starmer revealed he is the son of a toolmaker.
1 minute and 20 seconds is close to
That's
a miracle.
not bad, that's not bad. That's not bad. I'll settle for that after last week.
So, how the campaign is going so far is going to be our first topic up this week. And I find it genuinely difficult to believe it has only been a week and that we have got 5 more weeks to get through. And I love elections, but I'm definitely already feeling it. The Conservative election strategy, at least at this stage, seems to be very much on the defensive. Every policy announcement so far targeted at voters they hope will abandon Reform UK. Most UK parties have spent the majority of their time in the so-called blue wall, it seems. The SNP explicitly targeting Tory-held seats in Scotland. It's basically a pile-on. And opposition parties don't seem to be totally without their problems, so perhaps we can touch on a bit of that. Of course, in Labour have handled the Diane Abbott affair, I think, appallingly. And in Wales, the Labour leader there, Vaughan Gething, will face a vote of no confidence next week. The Lib Dems are obsessed with pneumonia / cryptosporidium risk comedy stunts. The SNP's new leader has barely had time to unpack his office, let alone devise a strategy. And the Greens, of course, are losing their most recognisable candidate, the wonderful Caroline Lucas. But it all kind of pales in comparison to the live action version of the thick of it that we are seeing unfold around the Tory campaign. So, look, we covered national service quite a bit on our Sunday school podcast, but I'm sure some of you have thoughts on that. Tell me what you think. I mean, Ian, quadruple lock, Mickey Mouse degrees.
We know you love public schools, so
and
presumably
you
you're all
scream
for
military man.
more of that for 18-year-olds.
People always think military man whenever they see me. I don't know what you're alluding to there. I will genuinely feel bereft, I think, when this election is over, because I've started to really emotionally need my morning boost of checking Twitter and being like, what have they done now? It's like the exact opposite emotional experience to the one I've had since 2016 reading Twitter. Is it's now just this incredibly joy. It feels like watching a really good sitcom, basically. He can't get anything right. So like once you untangle his presentational and cognitive and moral failures, you do see the evidence of a very, very conservative with a small c election campaign, right? Yesterday, he was in fucking Bosworth. Bosworth has been Tory since 1970. It has a Tory majority of over 25,000. It's just like, what are you doing there? The only reason you can be there is if you guys are sat there going, we are in a damage limitation exercise. You know, damage limitation at its smallest possible core. So I think you see that in him, that sense in his eyes of like the gradual diminishing embers of hope. That is reflected by virtue of the strategy that they are following.
And Miatta, Labour seems to be ahead in every age demographic group. Presumably, you know, that's giving
Which
you a lovely,
extraordinary
warm feeling.
itself,
But does that even shock you that every age group now? I mean, I think apart from some of the, you know, really oldest and richest and Waitrose shoppy voters now seem to be abandoning them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there is an overriding sense of change and people wanting change, and you feel it really acutely when you're on the doorstep. And obviously I've been campaigning my patch in Peckham, but also lending a hand to some of the marginals. And you know, you speak to people who've always voted Conservative. You know, it's in their blood, that's what they do. And there is a genuine anger and despair at what, you know, the people they've trusted have done. And I think that's the thing that you're sensing now. You know, we have it beaten in us not to be complacent, and there can be no complacency. And in the end, you have to fight for every single vote. But I have found it pretty astounding that, you know, he called the election and it feels like he just didn't have a plan.
He surprised himself.
He surprised himself.
Well, he surprised Liza Dorito by all accounts.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you know, just the basics. And actually the thing, you know, even not being in it, the thing just visually that strikes me is just the slickness. And actually, a journalist said to me, you know when a party is ready for government by how slick the operation is. And if I just compare the set piece, and actually we got quite lucky that we did our first steps kind of pretty much a like mini launch the week before. Even that, it's like, why would you do it the week after? The other side did a pretty good intervention. And then he just struggles. And then once you're on that downward cycle, it's really hard to climb out, not least because if there is an awkward picture to be taken, the journalist will take the picture. If there is, you know, a clangor to have because you're by the wrong sign, it will be spotted. And it just feels like he's in that doom loop. Now, what I would say is, you know, their capacity to turn things around, and they're amazing campaigners. So I think until we are at like 6 o'clock on the 5th of July, you have to fight as if you're behind.
I feel the same thing emotionally anyway. I look at all the polls and I think, no, it will be snatched away from me somehow. This happiness and pleasure that I feel now will be snatched away.
I feel that with that sentence, you finally truly become British. You've lost the last elements of Greek personality.
I've been supporting Spurs for 25 years now. I've had that feeling for a lot longer than that. But the thing baffles me ideologically is like, on your launch, you go, they want big state paternalism that's going to tell you what to do. And like your first announcement is national service for 18-year-olds, and we're going to fine their parents if they don't show up. And it's like, what are you doing? Seriously, but how does that tie into...
But in the same day, they sort of went for various age groups because they've criticised... Starmer for being sleepy Starmer, trying to borrow from the Trump campaign's attack on Joe Biden when he's 61.
61.
And
so
pretty fit, to be honest.
You know, 61-year-olds, they're sleepy. Teenagers, they're lazy and lack discipline. It's like, oh my God, like you're just trying to alienate absolutely everyone. Obviously, somebody had a word with them about that, so oh shit, we better give pensioners the quadruple lock, you know, throw them something.
And the juxtaposition of teenagers being both sleepy, useless and soft, but also marauding around London with machetes. It's like, which ones? Like, who do you want to... Anyway, right. The most recent announcement with the universities and the degrees they sort of deem unworthy, what do you think of that?
So this is obviously part of their quite protracted anger over New Labour's policy of expanding university places. And that is, I think, ideological. And it's an emotional heart comes from this idea that when you go to university, you basically become more progressive and liberal, which, by the way, you do. I mean, we do actually have pretty good evidence that is exactly what happens. And so they despise it. This talk of Mickey Mouse stuff, I mean, financially, it's completely illiterate. You cannot save any of the money that they claim they're going to save and put towards apprentices by doing what they're doing, because once you close down that course, by the way, the money follows the student to the course.
Right.
So you're not really making savings anyway.
Yeah.
But even once you close down that course, the university is just like, well, nothing's stopping us just having more students in this other course over here, which for whatever convoluted reason you've decided is not a Mickey Mouse course. So I don't think that they'll get the funding for their apprentices anyway. Then you look at the kind of stuff that they're doing when it comes to further education as opposed to higher education. Look at what they're doing with T-levels and BTECs. BTECs were the old system we used to have. T-levels, the new ones they introduced. And they decided, I mean, one of the things that BTECs did was it allowed you at the age of sort of 15, when you're making that decision, to go like, well, you know, hang on a minute. I might want to go in something like that. I might want to keep my doors open to go to university later on, keep my options open. T-levels really prevent you from doing that in a meaningful way. And yet they tried to squeeze out the BTECs, apply it all towards the T-levels, which had almost zero pickup, like that have really struggled to get any sense of pickup. All of it, whenever you look across the board, whichever element you look at, it's not really about apprenticeships. No, some people should have technical. It's about hatred of university.
You know what you were saying just now? It feels like really 70s, like really regressive. Going back to the idea that you determine whether a child is academic, in scare quotes, or not, at the age of 11, 12. And from that point onwards, it's like their life course is charted for good.
And coupled with their attacks on Labour over VAT for private schools. I mean, I've never heard Tories complain or worry about state schools closing down, which they have had to do. I mean, a lot of them are falling down at the moment because of the rat concrete. But to Ian's point about this sort of ideological hatred for, you know, people that go to state schools, people who don't do PPE at Oxbridge, it's not going to land well with any voter group that is going to be additive to those that are already sticking with them at the moment. Like, this is just terrible politics, but driven out of this sort of nasty ideology.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think it's strange for them to go on education because I think their record is terrible. And, you know, you have to, any parent, actually, whatever age your kids are, can give you a story about how tough things are, whether it's in our schools, our primary schools, our secondary schools, and in university. So it seems really odd that this is the sort of second pledge you'd have going into the campaign, because it's just not, you know, they are on the defensive about it. And it doesn't feel like there is a strategy. I don't think that, you know, the Mickey Mouse thing wasn't aimed at a particular group, because if you're trying to aim it at families that may not go into university but are aspirational, I'm not sure you would big up the apprenticeship part, right? You would be telling a story about how apprenticeships can lead you to equivalent university.
You would make it an offering to them, basically.
And there is something in that absolutely, you know, if you think about the German model or other European countries, vocational education has parity with academic education, and you can get the equivalent of a degree by doing it. Now, they could have gone big on that and told a story about how we're going to improve it. They can't, because they've absolutely decimated the higher education sector. But again, it doesn't feel like they were trying to target anyone. I feel like they've just got a random list of stuff that they're just making up day by day because they didn't have a campaign plan.
Well, go on then. What's our bets on what tomorrow's announcement is going to be?
Well, something has to come down the line soon that's going to be horrific on immigration. Like, just look at the way, you know, if it's national service, if it's pensioners, if it's you know, Wokery universities, like down that conveyor belt of policy is a horrific policy on immigration that we know must be coming at some point in this campaign. And I imagine that it will be, if what you're trying to do is get reform voters back, that it'll be weaponized to be as emotive and despicable as possible in order to fulfill that calculation.
I mean, they're just ticking off a list of Alistair Heath columns, basically saying this is the danger that's going to bring the West down.
And remember, you've got to ratchet up from where you were, right? So if Rwanda is your status quo now for asylum, you have to go further than that. It's basically like Hellraiser 5.
Yeah.
You know, you have to ratchet up the horror.
So our listener, we have listeners now.
Yay! Hi, listeners.
Liam,
Must be a new experience.
I know, wrote in and wants to know if you see distinct patterns in the party's strategies after a week. We talked about the Conservative strategy basically being all about the base, but the base, but the base. But what is Labour's strategy? I mean, you have insider knowledge of this, Miatta. They seem to just be staying well away.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there are three things that strike me about the campaign. I think one is a lot has gone into just making it look professional, so you look like a government in waiting. And if you just think about everything, just a very slick, smooth operation. The second thing that strikes me is actually Rishi's tried to personalise the campaign just around him, which I think is a strategy, quite a risky strategy, quite frankly. It's a strategy.
You can't learn that pause. You can't learn that timing, right?
Exactly. Whereas actually the Labour, they've got a team. And they're pushing out a team. And I think it is all about projecting. So each day there's a campaign theme, and then they've got a spokes that's running it. And then, Keir's there constantly. But I think actually giving that reassurance that there is a team that is ready to govern, I think is a big part of that and a big part of reassuring people. And then I think the arc of it will be reassurance at the start. At some point, the manifesto is going to come out. I think there's a decision about whether they do what we did in the Mayoral campaign, where you drip it. So every week you sort of drip out something new from the campaign and you build up to launching the manifesto. You do it in a big bang. But it feels like we're the grown-ups. We're going to reassure you that we are ready and we've got a plan. And then we try and give you a sense of what that means beyond the first steps that we've already put out.
And the blips in that journey are obviously the unknowns, as it were. And Diane Abbott, the story today, I mean, that is a problem. It's becoming a problem for Labour. What do you think, Ian?
Just a catastrophic, inane shit show where everyone comes out of it badly. But by the way, that includes her. And I don't like the way that this has been forgotten now.
Yes, that's true. Her original letter.
Her original letter was,
yeah.
And with you, I have to keep in mind that it came after the Corbyn period. Like after the Corbyn period, where you play a pivotal role, you're now going to write a letter to a newspaper talking about how Jewish people are basically the same as ginger people. It's just unbelievable, the fact that she could write, like, you read it and you're like, you learned nothing. Like, and that closing yourself off to what anti-Semitism is after that period was the reason that it could flourish in the party, because you didn't choose to learn anything about it in the first place. So it's just like, now that it's been so much time, I feel like there's no discussion of that original thing. There's all this thing about her historic role. Her historic role is really important. That does not exempt you from moral responsibility.
No, of course not. Of course not. But she's still a person, you know, I don't know, emotionally, as a Labour person, I hate seeing her being kicked around like this, you know, and I know she fucked up, but I can't help but also contain admiration for her, you know, for the trail she's blazed and for the shit she's taken. That must also never be forgotten,
so
right?
we can have both of those thoughts in our head at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. And look, the thing so in the black community, and obviously Peckahm, there's a massive, massive black community. This is really painful because she, you know, she was the first generation of black politicians. She broke ceilings. She was a role model and an icon for a lot of people. And, you know, the first generation of people that showed you actually there are no bounds to what you can do. And, you know, she's got stuff wrong. Of course she has. But I think the way it's been handled, I think has been really painful for people. You know, I have a lot of people that come to me and say, look, this is upsetting. And it shows that there is a lack of regard. And, you know, for me, the good news is the whip has been reinstated. I wish it had all been done much, much quicker. Whether she stands or not, I think, you know, is down to her. And I hope, you know, she's given the space to make that decision. And I hope we all just allow a bit of dignity in it now. You know, she's given a big stint to the party, and I think she should be allowed to, if she wants to bow out, she should be allowed to bow out in dignity.
Yeah. Naomi, on tactical voting, when do the getvoting.org recommendations come out? Because I know you're trying to push it like as close to the wire as possible.
Yeah, so timing is a trade-off, right? So you can go out with them early, but then your data won't have picked up squeeze. What do I mean by squeeze? Well, that's where Conservatives will be trying to squeeze the Reform UK vote in a marginal seat, saying, look, they're not going to win here, so lend your vote to us. And similarly, Labour will be saying to Lib Dem and Greens, it's us, not you. Come on, back us. And, you know, in other seats, that'll be the Lib Dems doing it to Labour. And in places like Brighton Pavilion, you know, it'll be very, very complicated. So the idea was getvoting.org. And remember, we called it correctly in 97% of the constituencies in 2019. We've been doing this for a long time. We know what we're doing. The trade-off is you either go early and don't get that squeeze into the data, or you go late and you risk some people having already voted.
Yeah.
So what we're doing is timing it as finely as we can to capture the majority of the squeeze. So short answer is recommendations will go live at 10 a.m. on the 17th of June.
Well, why didn't you just say that?
Because I'm getting a lot of people saying, please publish them sooner.
I see.
Particularly candidates that want to put it on leaflets or, go out canvassing with it. We think that with close of nominations being the first point at which a ballot paper could be printed, and then different local authorities print them at different paces and get them out over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. And then, of course, the registration deadline for a postal vote is later than that again, so they send them out in batches, means that, we think 17th of June gives people who have signed up for a postal vote plenty of time to return their ballot paper, but after getting the tactical voting advice.
Let's wrap this up very quickly. Favourite moments of the campaign so far? I'll start
with me. Okay, well,
with you.
Even at Conservative holdout Waitrose, the Tory lead has been heavily discounted to just 1.2 percentage points, and that's down from 36.4 in 2019. So even Waitrose has become a hyper marginal place for voters to be.
Miatta.
To be fair, it has to be a Davy falling off his paddleboard, just because that would be me. That would be me. I have no sense of balance at all. But no, on a more serious note, it definitely is. We had our first team campaign meeting, and you know when a set of people come together, and there's just that alchemy and there's that energy and there's that magic in the room, and you just feel so proud and so grateful to have so many amazing people around you. And that's how I felt yesterday.
Oh, we're proud and grateful for you. How about
I thought you were going to say that's how I feel now. I don't want to be basic, but I'm going to be.
Be basic.
It's the suit in the rain.
Yeah.
And it's mostly just because in the build-up, as it was raining and everyone's set up outside of Downing Street, the whole time I was just like, it's weird though, because it's raining, it's quite I wonder what they're going to do about, because you've lost so much. If you're a Liberal over the last few years, you just lose and you lose and you lose, and you're like, they're always going to pull a fast one. Basically, your newfound British heart. We will lose in the end. And then when he came out, and the sun came out for a bit just before, and I was like, fuck, this is it. This is how it works, isn't it? In the end, they win. And then he came out, and I was just like, what am I looking at right now?
We're just suckering him in.
I just couldn't. I was like, is this Shakespearean or is it worse? And then the joy that filled my heart still has not gone away. Yeah. Pills have nothing on the last week.
So I've been collecting the most nonsense stuff that politicians give as an answer to things. And my favourite this week was Mel Stride on Politics Live, who was asked about this policy of bringing back national service. And he was like, did you know about it ahead of time? And he kept trying to duck the question. And Joe Coburn kept going, were you briefed ahead of time that this was coming? And in the end, he said, all policies are not known about until they are known about.
Oh, wow. Oh, we went philosophical.
Very, very good.
Right. This week's call to action. The first debate has been announced on ITV, and you can submit questions. So go to the page for the ITV debate. We will drop the link in the show notes and submit the questions in there. And a clarification on last week's call to action, Julia wrote in to say that students can register at both term time address and the address you live outside of term time. So if you're not sure where you're going to be come the 4th of July, you can register in both. Right, it's that time of the week again when we delve into the most notable warning on the dangers of wokeness. It's time for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey. Wokey Dokey. Wokey Dokey.
It was an embarrassment of riches this week, Alex. But I have plumped for those notorious tofu-eating snowflakes over at the gambling industry. Nadine Dorries has branded Paddy Power woke because they dumped her one true love, Boris Johnson, from their planned Euro 2024 campaign following backlash from staff. So earlier this month, Johnson was meant to have signed a big money deal with the high street bookie for their ad campaign for the Euros, and staff didn't like the sound of it, and so they've sort of let that slip, and apparently he's no longer going to be appearing. And I think he was meant to make some kind of like cameo role, talking about like, you know, I'll get us back into Europe, or I can take us back into Europe as well. Ha ha ha! I'm so funny, aren't I? I destroyed the country, and then now I can laugh about it and pocket a very hefty ad fee for doing it. Anyway, staff were uncomfortable. Paddy Power took the decision. Actually, maybe if the staff are uncomfortable, potentially punters will be too.
Nadine was not happy. Presumably.
Nadine was not happy at all. So she is very, very unhappy that Bestie has been dropped and has now branded them all woke. But I have to say, an honourable mention has to also go to the Sun newspaper for branding Star Wars as woke, because we're getting closer to Pride Month. More and more corporate merch is appearing in rainbow flagged colours in support of their LGBT plus fans and customers and stuff. And so Disney released a rainbow coloured R2-D2.
Take my money now.
So there you have it. Both the gambling industry and a fictitious robot are now cancelled for being wider woke.
Thanks, Naomi. Listeners, if you want to be part of the wider woke club, email in any hilarious instances of woke to quietriotpod@gmail.com. Now, it shouldn't come as a shock that business is turning to Labour. The last election, after all, was won on the platform, fuck business, get Brexit done. And yet it continues to surprise that entities whose ultimate goal is profit. Indeed, in the case of public companies, profit is a duty, to see them saying, no thanks to your tax cuts. But in order to make profit, you see, most businesses need skilled, healthy people to work for them, infrastructure that is not falling apart, distribution chains that do not go out of their way to add burden, lawfulness, seriousness, rules that don't change from week to week, and a level playing field with no VIP lanes for mates. In them, Rachel Reeves has found a very receptive audience. Miatta, caution, fiscal responsibility, we get that. They're the watchwords, right? But doesn't Sunak have a point on this? Like the stagnation we've experienced, the low productivity, don't they require actually more radical intervention than safe hands?
Yeah, but I think the economic project has two parts. So you've got to get the foundations right, which is why stability has been a big, if you like, buzzword for Rachel. And if you just think about the madness of the last 14 years, you talk to any sector, any business, and the ability just to sort of crack on, because there's just been so much uncertainty and so much disruption and rupture. So there's definitely a sense that everyone just wants, it's not just businesses, everyone just wants things to calm down, just to be a bit more normal. So and I wouldn't underprice that. Because whether you are trying to invest or whether you are trying to just live your life, the lack of chaos, the lack of noise, the lack of a government that is all over the place, I think is a definite thing that we need to return to.
Do you get a sense then from chatting to business that there have been investment decisions sort of
100%.
deferred.
100%.
They're just waiting.
Oh, they're very honest about that.
Yeah.
We can't make long-term bets because you're all over the shop. Because when we have done, it's changed and we've got burnt. So, whether you're talking in the housing sector or the energy sector.
Or they import things which are postponed every 5 months. I mean.
Or, where I'm going to locate a plant on the basis of whether there will be a high-speed rail connection.
Yeah, definitely. It's just, there's just been too much madness, too much disruption, and just calming it down, I think is the first step. But that's not the totality of it. It's necessary but not sufficient. And that's when, if you think about the core planks of the kind of economic story she's tried to tell, the big underpinning of it all is, the big difference that people feel is a far more interventionist, muscular state that says it is our job to work in partnership with key parts or key players in the economy to move things along. So when you think about our Green Prosperity Plan, the big plank of that is, for example, the National Wealth Fund. That is the state, in a way that actually happens in a lot of European countries, but doesn't really happen here. Yeah. The state's saying, look, we're going to put in £1 if you bring in £3, and together we'll invest in big strategic bets. You align that with an industrial strategy. Now, we've used the language, but we've never actually had one. And so that is a core part of how do we start to bend the economy in a way where we know there is a big, there's a big strategic bet around green. Yeah. We know the transition
and to get it to look at the 15, 20, 25-year horizon, then constantly.
Exactly. And then you then bring in, our New Deal for workers. And why that matters to me is it says, look, when the economy does well, people have to do well. And if you want that, you have to put in a basic floor. We've got to have basic rights. You've got to ensure that people have a wage where they are earning enough to raise a kid. And then the final bit about it is there is a far stronger story about how we push things down. So recognition that, yes, you can do things at the national level to drive the economy. And that might work for some parts of the country, but it won't work for every part unless you push it down. So the devolution, what Boris used to call levelling up, is something that I think Labour has taken as a central part of their project. And those three planks with stability underneath it begins to sort of set the shape of what I think the economic project is.
So it's no real news because Rachel has been working business for years now and really reaching out to them, that we saw so many business leaders signing letters of support for Labour after the announcement of the election. And I was analysing some of the names that have come from backing the Conservatives that are now backing Labour. And it was interesting to me over which issues, because obviously I look at everything through the Brexit lens, and I can only imagine that was a huge motivator for many of them. But for some of them, it's green. Yeah. And it was Sunak rowing back on the 2030 target. That was the tipping point for some of them. So that I find really interesting. But Miatta, I do want to ask you about that stability point, economic stability. I hear what you're saying entirely from a political message and for voters, that people don't want any more crises and lurching from crisis to crisis from the government, and they would love to be able to turn on the news and for it to feel safe to do so and calming the waters. But very specifically on the economy, which is stagnant, anything that's talking about stability sort of feels a bit too status quo. And I also worry that it's got echoes of Gordon Brown, no more boom and bust. So why sort of pledge to keep something stable over which you have actually very little control, because we are in a globalised economic world and shocks are going to happen?
Yeah, look, shocks will happen. And I don't think the promise is the world will be benign. The world isn't benign. We know the world isn't benign. But at the very least, it is the job of the government not to make things worse. The things that are within the control of the government, they ought to do in order to help us all collectively navigate through what's happening. And I think that is what's on offer. The big bet is growth. The thing I found really interesting is the extent to which, to be fair, the party has generally listen and internalise what's coming from the business community. So a lot of them will say, when with my old hat on, you'd go and you sort of go to these business dinners or meetings or roundtable, and the three things were, we want stability. Like literally, that's the first thing they said. This is before this became like a core part of our project. We want stability. Second thing was planning. And the third thing is we need to build trust and have a proper partnership with government. And it has been internalised. And I think it is that that's brought them all out. There's been a rupture of the relationship with the Conservative Party, and actually a sense that the Labour Party is listening. And like the hard bit is turning that into action that will fundamentally change, because no one is saying the status quo is what we want. Everyone, including those business leaders, like, we need change.
We need growth.
Yeah.
we desperately need growth.
Ian, on trade in this sort of area, are you surprised by how completely absent Brexit has been from this election? I mean, 3 years ago, we would have thought that the Tories would have tried to weaponize it in some way, because it was the thing that brought that weird coalition of voters together for them. So, I mean, we know why Labour won't go there, but why won't the Tories go there?
Honestly, I think the silence on that from the Conservative Party is the most profound recognition of its failure that we will find. Far more profound than any of the data or the evidence. The fact that at no point, I'm sure someone must have said it somewhere, but I haven't heard any Tory frontbencher come up and try and whip up and try to regain some of that reform vote by just going like, come on guys, do you remember we gave you Brexit? No one's even saying it. And that's astonishing, right? That silence genuinely speaks volumes. And obviously Starmer's just never going to say it. Starmer's... His main thing is this, especially when we think of electoral strategy. And Morgan McSweeney, who's sort of, running things around this, it has a very sound judgment on it, which is that it is about maximizing the efficiency of the geographical distribution of your vote. That is what we care about in this country. We do not give a shit about the popular vote. We don't count it. We don't care about it. It doesn't matter. We care about the distribution of the vote. Yep. And Labour's vote is extremely efficiently distributed. And that's because of the absence of stuff around Brexit. And, why is Labour taking out ads in the Mail? Why is it going for editorials in the Express? Look at the way that its vote is performing in those seats. It is rising much, much faster than it is in safe Labour seats, where you get all this surplus vote just sort of wasted in 2019, accomplishing nothing, right? This is all part of that strategy. So we were never expecting Keir Starmer to say very much about it in this election, and he's lived up to our expectations.
And what about the Lib Dems, Ian? Why do you think they're not talking about Brexit?
Because I would say this on that. I was so wrong. I've been wrong so many times with the Lib Dems of what I thought that they should do at certain periods. Like coming out of 2019, I would say things like, well, the space is there, right? Labour doesn't want the big Remain votes, so why not go for it as the Lib Dems? I think the truth is that the Lib Dems recognise the truth, which is that they require a certain degree of mercuriality in their personality. They function by, I don't like these two, or I don't like this one in my seat, so I'm going to plump for these guys over here. And I think you saw that in the by-elections where they would win in heavily Leave voting seats. Yeah. You're seeing it now. They also have reasons to be quite mercurial in their position on this matter, and indeed on any other number of matters, including planning. So, I mean, there's lots of areas where they're frankly mercurial to the point of disingenuousness.
Miatta, we had another announcement today of another junior doctors' strike that will go on for 5 days. I think it's coming in a couple of weeks. This is an aspect that has always surprised me. That is one way in which I have not yet become British, right? This notion that a government can have a terrible relationship with unions and sort of boast about it, even though one of the biggest ones, it's like public service worker, which are the delivery arm on which it relies to deliver its policies. Like, you wouldn't see it in any other sector. You wouldn't see the CEO of Mercedes-Benz coming out and say, this blob, they hate me, and I'm proud of it. We're going to keep edging them to hate me more. It's like, but you're not producing any cars, man. So why has that become like, why can't it be that you can have a good relationship with businesses and trade unions, because both are needed?
Well, absolutely. If you look across Europe, that's the model. You get businesses and you get unions around the table and you negotiate and you drive things forward. By the way, that's the approach I think Labour will take. In the end, the line that's constantly put out is we're pro-business and pro-worker. And I think that's how it'll play out. Why the government has allowed so many fights that it could have resolved to play out, I don't know. I think it comes down to competence.
Like the doctors thing. I mean, they're offering 28p a week to pensioners. I mean, I would think that part of the reason why you see Labour being more popular, even among the over 65, is that they would prefer an ambulance to turn out when they call,
fewer doctors,
emergency.
fewer pensioners.
Do you know
It's
what
that
I mean?
meme.
Because 28p ain't going to do it then.
Yeah. No, I've never understood why they've taken the approach that they've taken. Back in the day, you got politics out of it. You got politics out of bashing the unions. I think the thing that the union movement has done really effectively this time, with a few exceptions, is it's taken the public with them. You know, if you told me that junior doctors and nurses striking, that broadly the public wouldn't turn against them, I wouldn't believe it, because that's the pattern.
Especially after this many years.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that's the pattern. And actually, because people can, I think they did two things. I think it was never just about our pay. It was us being the defender of the services you all rely on. And people could see that.
Yeah.
If you go into any of those public services, you're like, yeah, we understand why they're striking, and they're doing it on our behalf, on the public's behalf, because it's not safe or it doesn't work for our children. And they should have spotted that, and they should have resolved, and they didn't. And this is my point about, I just think it's incompetence. I've stopped trying to there's no rationality to a government that is just out of its depth. I think they're just not very good.
Sorry, go on, Ian.
We're in a really weird ideological place right now, by the way, I think, and I don't think we've quite recognised how much things have changed. You look at what Labour's proposals are, and in each and every area, they're about market failure. You look at whether it's net zero, whether it's labour markets, whether it's nationalising rail. People talk about Starmer like he's like Blair. He's actually really not like Blair at all. Or Macron. Blair and Macron were both like sort of pro-market and putting themselves on the open side of the open-closed binary. Starmer doesn't do that.
No.
He's not on the open side of it at all. He's much more mercurial on that stuff. But when it comes to state market, he's actually pretty pro-state intervention. And this is the result of something that starts with a financial crisis, it goes through austerity, it includes Brexit and Trump, and COVID. All of these instances of like, no, actually, we want state intervention.
Do you know, that is exactly what I was going to ask. Is the neoliberal, let's use that awful portmanteau term, is that model in trouble? Because it seems to me that, yes, all the stuff you talked about, the pandemic came, furlough happened. And then I think even more interestingly, the energy crisis came and people expected that the state must intervene.
Yeah.
And that says to me that when you look at the climate catastrophe, when you look at immigration, all of that stuff requires muscular state that's working internationally. And so going to people and saying, we're going to shrink the state and, be splendidly isolated.
Not a vote winner.
It doesn't acknowledge anything that's happened in the last 15 years. So is this a more fundamental spasm on that side of politics?
But it's not even just electoral, right? It's also intellectual. What is the case? Financial crisis. What is the case? They used to say for ages, Alan Greenspan would say things like, well, you let the market regulate itself. Okay, well, what actually happens when you get credit rating agencies that are paid by the banks to assess the safety of their product? Not good things. What do you do in the middle of a pandemic? What's the market solution to a pandemic? Not good things.
It's not good things, I think, is the best description of the global financial.
My most generous. And so what do you have left? The whole intellectual structure of that way of looking at the world is shattered in pieces on the ground. And I know that it's hard to trace the linkage between the intellectual elements and the popular and the electoral elements, but they are there. People do recognize in their own language that the evidence that is in front of them in the world, and that is the place that we're living in right now. One of the most extraordinary things when you see sort of Corbyn types attacking Starmer at the moment, who seem most upset, frankly, than anyone you see about what's happening.
Any poll that comes out, the people that are most obsessed about it.
Is that lot? And you're like, how can this be your reaction to we're on the verge of getting one of the most left-wing governments we've certainly seen in my lifetime. You know what I mean? You have to go back quite far to see a government that looks more left-wing than this one.
He is very old.
Look, I remember the early days of Attlee, and it was fine times.
Can I just say to you, I was having a conversation with my other half the other day, and I was saying that genuinely, if the only thing that changed with Labour coming in is that we get a government that has some modicum of respect for the rules and understands public service and will not go around just kicking stuff over because it's funny, that will be actually enough of a a massive change, right?
Oh, yeah.
Before you add in Great British Energy or nationalising railways, which are policies that the left should be salivating over. And they're like, yeah, but Keith.
Can I give you a quick story? So I couldn't agree with that point more. So I've been going around and visiting schools. And I was in one of our local schools. I was with the student council, kids from 11 to 18. And the head said, you know, what do you think of politics and politicians? And it was the most depressing and 5 minutes of my life.
Humbling.
Almost burst out into tears, but anyway, onwards and upwards. And they were like, you know, you're in it for yourself, you lie, you don't do, you don't keep your promises, just this, and I just looked at them and I was like, all of you have seen the very worst of politics. So I don't blame you for the way that you feel, and our job is not to say, but to show you, and that's the thing that weighs heavy. We've got to just raise the standards again, and just lift it, because if a generation comes through and that's what they think of our politics, and, I believe politics can drive and change things, that's just very, very depressing, but also really dangerous. And so that point about just do it well, do it with dignity and do it well is as much of a win as anything else.
Right. Call to action. This is not an easy one, right? But actually there is something you can do. Join a union or join a trade association if you're in business. If you contact the TUC, they can actually advise you if there is a union that covers your sector, or they can tell you if there are moves to create a union that might cover your sector. There are equivalent bodies for trade associations. There's the Trade Association Forum, right? They're the trade association of trade associations. Like, you call them as a business and they tell you there is something that covers your area. So the next year is going to be key in nudging people like Miatta towards the right policies, right? And making sure your voice is heard when policies are being considered. So join a union or join a trade association. Do it now.
This week, we're bringing you another regular feature. You gotta troll with it. We thought it would be funny and perhaps even empowering to occasionally update you with some of the best hate mail that we receive. Now, Alex has a regular pen pal who I'm sure we're going to get to know through this segment.
Oh, yes, you'll hear from Charlotte at some point.
Charlotte is magnificent. And as a woman in politics, you won't be surprised to know that I get a shit ton of abuse. But Alex, why don't you kick us off? Who's taken time out of their day recently to pen you some poison?
Ian Dunt and quisling gay Alex Andreou are hypocrites. You get off easy, mate. You wait.
I do.
Too weak to stand up for women. The quisling gay says this reminds him of Section 28, insulting gays of that generation who are now trying to prevent kids being transed. As a verb.
As a verb?
Yeah. Wow. Kids being transed. So I read that. I hear you. I respect your point of view. But all I got out of it is that you think I'm too young to have experienced Section 28, about which I am utterly
Section 29 is the new policy being announced tomorrow.
Right. Who's next? Come on. Who wants to do it?
I didn't have a specific... I mean, you could... Look, any day if you look at my Twitter, someone will send me the following tweet, which is, well, you got what you wanted, isn't it? Boris Johnson in Downing Street. And I swear to God, I swear, I'm not going to find a particular example because I swear to God it will be there every day. It's always from the Corbyn guys. And what's amazing, like, it's particularly worth mentioning in front of you two, who were around at the time. We're just like, that really wasn't what I was doing at the time. I don't feel that my messaging was subtle at the time. I feel like it was quite clear.
Or after the event.
Exactly. So what's extraordinary about messages like that is you realise that there's another version of you that exists in some
you
people's
don't know
heads
about.
and you're just like, what an amazing thing! Who is this person? You've sort of invented. It's in a way, I'm kind of fascinated by that second version of me, but not so fascinated that I don't want it to fucking stop.
Yeah.
Well, I've got an email that was in a reply to an email promoting Quiet Riot to our supporters, which said...
Also, it's directed at us specifically.
I'm not interested in podcats or any other audio/visual info, full stop. Please stick to the written word if you want my attention.
What the fuck?
So weird. I love that. No sign off. That was it. Yep.
Okay. So, yeah. We are planning actually to do transcribe. No, seriously though, because we do want to reach out to people who have hearing difficulties.
Okay.
So we are trying to put together a transcribed version of the show that happens relatively automatically that we can then quickly check.
I'm glad. It just strikes me, it's a bit like someone, like a football supporter going to a rugby game and holding up a sign going like, "Stop picking up the ball, you bastards." You're just like, well, you fucking don't come.
That's a foul, ref. Handball, ref.
Please don't be tempted to add to the pylon, but I hope you found that funny, and we will be back with more of those soon, and Poll the Other One will be back next week.
And that is it for another week, unless we cannot help ourselves again and end up ranting about something in an emergency cast.
You can follow us on social media at Quiet Riot Pod, or drop us an email with ideas for future guests and topics to quietriotpod@gmail.com.
And remember to like us, rate us, follow us, subscribe to us, post about us, stalk us generally, and tell your friends.
Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou and me, Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Cadalou. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global. See ya!
We didn't thank our guests and give them a chance to say goodbye.
Ah, fuck them.
Yeah. We don't need to say goodbye.
I hope we're still recording.
Yeah, no, I've got a horrible feeling that will stay in.